Mostly I want to say two things as my opening remarks. First of all, the day after Abu Mazen began yesterday, meaning if anyone thinks that we will wait around for the day that Abu Mazen will no longer function because he decides to stop or because he is forced to, and only then Israel will decide on what to do and start deliberating and making decisions, then we'll be somewhere else. Israel is a big place, and changing a strategy and a policy takes time, so it has all sorts of plans for all sorts of scenarios, and therefore the day should have started. And he said very gently, I want to see plans, and from my acquaintance and familiarity with the security establishment, the ISA and the IDF, each of these organizations probably has a plan, and maybe it's a part of a whole, the whole being a national strategy, and that is why we have convened in order to bring in our perspective. Another thing that was said here is the day after can be a strategic opportunity. That is how we view it, to change reality. If we look at the purpose that we have put here, divided into two, we'll soon move on to the next slide. The purpose says, in general, that we will want to see a change, we will want to see a transition in power, we will want to see new leaders stepping up, and we will want to see a return to the Oslo Accords, a return to meeting the terms of these agreements. And of course the question is, how do we do that? Well, we analyzed that, and I will address that in a moment. First of all, we analyzed incentives, but we also looked at an organized strategy that ultimately we will be able to adapt it to any change, and we will present that. The State of Israel does not want to intervene in this process, even though here too there are some points of intervention. Cooper mentioned them beforehand. Hamas rising to power, Baruti, all sorts of options like that will require Israel, as we understand it, to intervene. However, anything else, we will want to see an internal process that is not involving Israel. What if that doesn't happen? Well, we think that a turning point would be when the Palestinian leadership would declare a state with the support of international institutions, the UN, countries in the region, etc., or an escalation, terrorism, all sorts of outcomes, and also a situation where there is broad escalation. There too there will be a plan on how to make that into an opportunity to restart. If we talked before about going back, returning to stability vis-a-vis the PA, here we would want to restart and to get to a point where we are actually collecting a price from the PA. If you look at the lessons learned from Operation Defensive Shield, that was a huge operation that had a detrimental effect on every area in the Palestinian Authority, terrorism, finance, etc. But the PA remained. This political, economic price, infrastructural price, anything that has to do with this whole entire system remained, and that still accompanies us to this day. So in such a situation, of a turning point or escalation, we would want to see restarting happening. So how would we do that? Well, the key considerations are, we have analyzed a whole broad system of considerations. First of all, the Israeli interests, because a strategy should be built upon a vision. So we left this very important task to the political leadership, what they want to see, and we worked on a sort of bypass method. We marked Israel's general interests, and also in the Palestinian area, very detailed, specific list of interests, and then according to those we decided where we want to go. We analyzed the repercussions for the international arena, sensitivity in terms of the United States and its relations vis-a-vis the Palestinian issue, countries in the EU, and so on. And of course we looked at the regional arena, Jordan, Egypt, all the way to the Gulf states, Saudi Arabia. All of these were taken into consideration. And one final thing I wanted to say about the considerations is the domestic issue. The current internal legitimization required for any government in any decision that it will take in terms of the Oslo Accords and the territories will require broad consensus, and that's one of the reasons why the Israeli government have to date refrained from making decisions on these topics, and it is of course very relevant, especially today. You can see the interests, but I'm not going to go and speak one by one. Let's go to the next slide, please. Great. The national basket of efforts. If you don't know, these are terms from the political echelon. National efforts was coined by Major General in Reserves Amidro, who headed the committee for the roles of the cabinet after Protective Edge. And the political exhaustion means how Israel brings all of its resources in order to being able to implement its vision and strategy. Here we have put the scenarios that Cooper showed before. We said next to it says what we should do, and the bottom line is this very detailed basket that we described in the paper, a basket of tools that allows the government, according to the reality. And we have to say that the names are important, and Cooper talked about them. We will see who the leadership is, and we will test them on the ground in the reality. And in light of that, we will have a basket of tools throughout this in order for it to happen. 5 practical recommendations for the political echelon. First of all, cabinet deliberations and discussions. There is no substitute for them, especially when it comes to these kinds of topics, the Palestinian issue, etc. Any discussion, even if it is headed by the Prime Minister, is no substitute. It can be complementary, but there must be cabinet discussions, so we have to start them yesterday. Second, political efforts. I spoke about that. All state capabilities used. The United States, we recommend setting up a discourse or a dialogue mechanism, just like we did on the Iranian issue, a professional mechanism from several organizations where the professional dialogue is held very matter-of-factly. The same should be true for the Palestinian issue. The war game, Edelstein talked about that. It's a very important issue, a war game with all the echelons, Prime Minister, ministers, anyone needed, of course, cabinet members, and the members of the defense establishment, very important to internalize. And the last thing is the idea of the defense establishment. They must begin preparing, not for taking over, not for attacks. That is already happening. You don't need to tell IDF to do that, but for other things that we have highlighted, mapping infrastructure in terms of correction, security, all sorts of construction irregularities, which just like we have targets for attacks, we should have goals in that area. Thank you very much. These were our recommendations.